Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 43 of the CUInsight Experience. My name is Randy Smith, and I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Jim Morrell. Jim is the president and CEO at Peninsula Credit Union in Shelton, Washington. Jim and I became friends while on a DE trip to Kenya over the summer. Something happens when you share such an amazing experience with a group of people like that I quite honestly think Jim and I are both still trying to unpack. In this episode, we have a wide-ranging conversation about that DE trip and the work he's done with SACOs on the continent, how he brings those experiences home and has strengthened his credit union and the work they do in their community. We also talked about payments. Jim sits on the board of NACHA, the Electronic Payments Association, so he has a unique perspective on the future of financial services and specifically credit unions. I knew Jim and I would have a blast on this. We had enough for 2 episodes, quite honestly, with how long we talked before and after we hit record. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Jim Morrell. Enjoy. Jim, welcome to the show.
Good morning, Randy. It's good to see you.
Oh, man, I've been looking forward to this. We spent a bunch of time this summer together in Kenya, or this past summer, and, on a DE trip. And I would say we definitely had an amazing group, and it was awesome to meet all of them. And the spirit of DE, I will say you and I also shared the best safari truck ever, hashtag that. So, and if I remember correctly, you invited me on it, so I appreciate it. But
I think it was mutual. It's getting to know people in a very intimate setting with these wild animals around you.
Absolutely. Oh man, that was such a blast. I mean, before we started recording, you and I were just both catching up and talking about this stuff. It's an amazing experience. And that is where I would like to, kind of start. There's getting to know you with all the time, the windshield time. There were so many questions I had for you, but I did want to start with your involvement with DE, and not only DE, but, international development as well. That was my first experience. I know it's something you've done quite often. So a couple of questions. Number one, why is it so important to you? And, and what are the benefits, I guess, personally and professionally that you see from it?
Sure. Yeah. And then this trip was absolutely stellar. The one that you and I went on this past June. Of my 3 opportunities to travel over to the continent, I think this was the most impactful for me and took me the longest to kind of digest what was going on. And what I came away with was the term I've been thinking of the most is unknown impact. And so how many different lives did we encounter or touch? How many opportunities? I was there a little bit earlier to teach a facilitation course with Lois Kitch. Those people were learning things. I was learning from the participants in that class, or when we were at the Don Bosco school, same thing. The DE phrase is trust the process, and just trusting the process that the impact that we made will be long lasting and positive. And for me, that is sort of like what we do every day here as well. We are trusting the process that in helping our members, we're going to have this long impact. And I come away with these opportunities, to your question about motivation, not only with inspiration, but the visits and help me learn how rich people are who otherwise might be perceived as poor.
Oh, absolutely. The one thing, and I think I mentioned that on the podcast that Lois and I did, from the Don Bosco school sitting on paint cans, is like there was a moment that I had just watching the kids there where it was like, you know what, no matter where you live in the world, you still just want to play tag and run around with a smile on your face. You know what I mean? Like it was such an emotional thing, but it was also such a human, thing where you're just like, kids are kids, I mean, this is, there's no difference in anybody, in the end there. So no, I am with you. When you come back home from an experience like that, is there something that you feel, Peninsula Credit Union benefits from, or your community as a whole? Because I know you're actively involved, in that as well. We were talking about some things before we got on the air. So,
yeah. In 2016, it really connected for me that the trips are motivational. I spoke at the African Congress. CASCA is the Pan-African Trade Association. And the theme of that Congress that CASCA had was to eradicate poverty across the African continent. And that is a big, hairy, audacious goal.
I was just going to say, that's a great goal. That's a goal. That's an amazing goal.
1.3 billion people, right? And so I come back and think, I'll be damned if Peninsula Credit Union can't change the lives of just a couple of folks here on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and improve their financial life. And so it gives me the inspiration that if my African colleagues and friends are having the impact that they are in their communities and with people's lives, I'm pretty certain that we're able to do the same thing, inspired by what they've accomplished there.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite story from one of your development tips you could share with us?
Yeah. Again, that same trip in 2016, one of the most memorable experiences was I was with my friend Marjorie Mandu in Harare, Zimbabwe, and she was taking me around to visit these different credit unions, or SACCOs, as they're called there. And Mukuvisi SACCO is one that we visited, and she took me into what I can best describe to Americans as what looked like a junkyard.
Okay.
And into this dimly lit room with a board of directors that was sitting there, and I sat and they were all facing me. And the short version of the story is that they were seeking my advice on why they were doing what they're doing as a credit union. And I can't answer that for them, right? I'm not from Harare. So we had a discussion. I turned the question around and I said, what motivates each one of you to be here sitting with me right now? What motivates you to connect with this Mukuvisi SACCO? And to a person almost, they said two things. One, we want to help our employees learn how to save a little bit of money so that, number two, they have some money left over to support their family, their wives and their children after they pass away, and to have a funeral celebration for them, because that's a big dealio there. What I learned in this conversation is that each one of these board members had their own little business. One was making beautiful cabinetry. Another was making really amazing furniture. There was a fencing company, a well pump supply businessman that was there. There was 12 of these small little businesses. And as a cooperative on that property, it really wasn't a junkyard. It was producing amazing products. And so I asked them a second question. I said, I want you to just sit here for a second and listen to what's going on outside, because there was no windows in this room. There was windows, but no glass. And what we heard were kids playing. We heard saws. We heard hammers. We heard productivity, people talking and communicating. And I said, and we talked about all of those different sounds and realized that what they were trying to do was strengthen their community so that those individuals that were working there could pass that along to the next generation. And it was so powerful to be there in that moment. It was not me imparting, as the American in the room, my brilliance on how they could become successful. It was them tapping into what they were hearing in the world around them in that community that hopefully they're now leveraging. Again, an unknown impact. I haven't been back in 3 years, but hopefully leveraging that conversation to strengthen their SACCO going forward in Harare.
That's amazing. I love the stories from over there, and it's fun to tell them, right? I will say this. When you were talking about them producing different things, the first thing that popped into my head was, I wonder if any of them were making masks that our buddy Brent Rempe could buy. I think you talked him into 3 when he was trying to find one. So now he's a collector.
It's always cheap when you buy multiple.
Right. Got a good price. So
third one becomes almost free.
I mean, at that point, why not? Come on. So a shout out to Brent.
That's right. And they look great on his wall, too.
Absolutely. We've seen the pictures. So, hey, one of the things that I know you were proud of and that, like we talked about, was the impact, and this goes back to the community, the impact you're having in your community was working with the YMCA in Shelton. Could you tell our listeners about that? And I think a lot on the podcast, we've talked about the community ties and the give back to community being that really can be a big differentiator for credit unions. So I know how involved you are, but for our listeners, why is that community involvement and give back so important for not only you, Jim, but also for, your crew at Peninsula Credit Union and your members? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So starting with the YMCA, that's an effort that we've been raising capital funding for that project, which is set to break ground in December of this year. Close to $16 million of capital that's been raised in a community that has 11,000 people here in the city of Shelton and 60,000 people across our county. It's a monumental project, but it's not only a YMCA. It's really being built as a community center with partnerships with Mason General Hospital and Family of Clinics, with the school district, with Workforce, with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and a number of other community partners. And as I was working on the capital campaign, and as our board of directors reached a decision to make a $100,000 capital campaign commitment, which was historic in our 84 years of existence, we realized that another part of that community partnership with the Y is financial health. So they're focused on physical health with the hospital, recovery from different, heart surgeries and so forth. And we're focused on financial health. And so bringing those together and really, as many of the folks that are listening to this have probably heard, the National Credit Union Foundation and Gigi Highland have been spearheading this effort and this awareness. So we're beginning to learn how to weave that into what we've been doing in terms of community development and looking at how we can use some of those same tools and resources to strengthen our own staff's financial health, and then collaborate with the community through the YMCA once that opens here in about a year and a half. So those community ties that we have with partners, and we have, at least a dozen and a half community partners across our service areas, probably more. It really helps us empathize with who it is that we're trying to serve, and to listen and understand what they're going through as far as their financial aspect of their life. People go through a lot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the slice that we think that we're best equipped to assist is in that financial viability.
If people want to, we'll link to it, but if people want to know more about the program from the foundation, Gigi talked a lot about it on episode 2 of the podcast. So, and I know again, back in the best safari truck ever, you, Danielle, and I were talking a lot. We talked about that there too. So it's awesome. I absolutely love what you're doing there. It seems like a pretty amazing thing for the community as a whole, much bigger than just a YMCA, right? And for
absolutely
the credit union to be a part of it, that's beautiful. This was a question that I really never asked you, like when we spent time together, but when you came into Peninsula Credit Union, was the commitment to community already there? And is it something you've grown, or was it something that, like, from a cultural standpoint and change, you had to change from the ground up?
It was what was here and still does exist here with our team is their focus, incredible focus on service and doing right by our members. And it took me about a year to assess this, not only where we're headquartered, but we have 5 branches that span 85 miles. It's about a 2-hour drive because we're driving around bodies of water here in the Puget Sound area. And understand that what I was looking at outside of either my office window or the car windshield when I was driving to our different locations is that there's an incredible portion of our communities, and that's not just here, with folks that are struggling to survive financially. And so it was a matter over the course of that year to bring that into focus and to say, how can we begin to listen, serve, educate, and care for those folks always, which is our mission statement, and turn that mission into a community development focus where we're not only focused on products and services, but first and foremost focused on underbanked individuals and demonstrate how we can enrich their lives, whether they are wealthy or moderate or low income households. So we began to develop a target audience, which we happen to call Alice Pearl, but Alice, ALICE, is an acronym that the United Way uses, asset limited, income constrained, and employed. And they have some tremendous resources on the United Way Alice's website for that. The Pearl aspect was kind of happenstance because Pearl was the name of an individual that was in a transitional shelter who, working with our community financial educator, we have somebody that primarily focuses his work outside of the hallowed halls of a traditional branch. We were working with an individual named Pearl who had a couple of children, who was in her mid-30s, didn't have a partner but would like one, but really had her children in mind and their future. Also happened to be the grandmother's name of our marketing director, Pearl. And
I love it.
Here we're known as the largest shellfish producer in the United States, maybe the world, and inside of the oysters are pearls. So it was a perfect fit. We refer to that audience as our Alice Pearls, and developed products and services that incentivize positive financial behavior. So Save to Wing Save to Win, prize-linked savings accounts, or lower interest for timely loans, which is a loan program where if people make their loan payments on time, we automatically reduce their interest rate. So a lot of things. And we also went about certifying 100% of our 70 staff. All of us are certified as community development financial counselors.
Oh, that's awesome.
Through a program with Credit Union Strategic Planning. And so whether you're in IT or the CEO or in our front lines or underwriters in our loan department, everybody needs to have some sense of understanding of how we use tools about building budgets or rebuilding credit scores or things that can happen in people's financial lives like medical debt, and know that that's our purpose and our mission. And we're pretty, as you can hopefully tell, I'm pretty jazzed about it. And I think our folks are really excited about the impact that we have in people's lives.
That's very cool that it's credit union wide as well, right? Like it's just not the development team or something of that nature. So very cool. Hey, one thing before we get into the second part of the show that I found this very interesting because I think you have a unique perspective. So this is a hard pivot from development issues to payments. So you're on the board of NACHA, the Electronic Payment Association, who, I mean, you're the credit union guy on that, but we're talking like big time payment players and, huge banks, the too big to fail, let's call them. So, I mean, a quick question is like, how'd you get involved with that? And then also, like, is there something that you're seeing from the outside when you have the ability to be with that group that are either the biggest challenges or issues that you do see that are also going to affect credit unions going forward?
Yeah. So how did I fall into that? I think was your first question, right? And it really was based on my prior life at IQ Credit Union in Vancouver, Washington. I had direct responsibility over our payments department. So ACH, wires, cards. And with that background, I was invited to be on the board for WestPay, which is a regional payments association covering 12 Western states, and represent, again, with community bankers and other bigger financial institutions. From there, a couple of years later, NACHA has a very extensive a competitive nominating process. And they were looking at the time for somebody that had three different hats. Somebody from a West Coast institution, because they were looking to expand same-day ACH services and consider West Coast and further west timeframes, Hawaii and Guam, Alaska. Somebody from a smaller financial institution, and at $195 million, I qualify compared to everybody else, and an institution that was consumer-oriented, because a lot of the folks around the NACHA board have as you mentioned, a broader payments experience or maybe a treasury management experience or background. So I fit the bill and went through that process as when invited onto the board. And you're absolutely right. I have developed some tremendous friendships. I've been fortunate to be asked by the board to serve as vice chair and sit between Wells Fargo in the chair's seat and Huntington National Bank as secretary treasurer. And there's Jim
from Peninsula.
It's provided me a lot of insights into, we talk about data all the time. And as a smaller institution, I don't have the ability or resources to harvest all of that data, but I do have colleagues and friends in some of these other institutions. So I know where payments trends are going and involved through NACHA with conversations with the Federal Reserve Bank, with the clearinghouse, and with other major payments players, and begin to develop ideas around how credit unions might continue to pay attention to that. So, historically, as financial institutions, and this is true for whether it be credit unions, community banks, or any of us, historically, we've really been focused on two things: loans and deposits. And in today's world, there's a third leg of that stool, which is payments, because whoever controls that payment now is controlling the relationship with that consumer. And if you forget about that payments aspect, then you're going to lose the deposits and you're going to lose the loan opportunities, in my opinion. So that's really a major takeaway that I've had in my experience with both NACHA and WestPay. And I think the control of the payments gets back to something that we remain focused on all the time, too, is what's your core purpose? So it doesn't make any sense if your community is not in a tech area, perhaps, to be focused on the shiniest, newest technology. It makes more sense, perhaps, to develop products that are going to be able to support the financial lives of those members in your community. Too many times, I think financial institutions, we as credit unions, chase that latest product or service opportunity or something we see one of the big financial institutions, Wells Fargo or B of A, doing. And I frequently tell people, just stop, just pause, figure out what your core purpose is, and then reconnect that to the resources you have and the opportunities that exist in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's such maybe a dilemma, right? Like the idea that kind of keeping up with the Joneses, but they're also like there becomes a certain level of like almost expectation, like when we're dealing, whether it's with financial institutions or Amazon or anybody, right? Like, so it's I want to still throw this question out there to you, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And it's like, we've seen a lot of smaller financial institutions disappear. I asked this quite, credit unions, specifically, since we started CUInsight 11 years ago, there were 11,000, I think, at that time. Now there's about 5, right? So is there something fundamentally that you think needs to change? Or kind of like what you just said, is it getting back to the core values and asking, why are we doing this?
I think we need to lead with our core purpose in our decision making and use that as the litmus test or the filter through which we make decisions, rather than making decisions on that latest product that Amazon might be coming out with or Facebook. We need to stop so much looking at some of those as competitors and figure out how we strengthen ourselves. They are competitors in the marketplace, but too many people, I think, make decisions about what those big organizations, companies are able to do. You know, the interesting thing in some of the friendships that I've developed on the NACHA board, I spoke on a panel in Honolulu, I think about a year ago, and I had 3 of what would be considered the big 5 come up to me like almost immediately afterwards and say, so you're doing this community development thing and helping out low to moderate income individuals, and really didn't know that. And I said, yeah, we are. And their follow-up was, tell us how that works. Yeah. Help explain to us what it is you're doing, because they're so far removed from the front line. Not that their organizations don't have that interest to some level as well, but the colleagues that I have are saying you're always focused on the member, the consumer, the customer, and you're always focused on the strengthening the association of not just development of the rules which govern the ACH network. NACHA, as some people may or may not realize, is the only association that I'm aware of in financial services that connects all 10 or 11,000 financial institutions together. Yeah. There's no other association. We have the ABA and the ICBA on one side, CUNA and AFCU on the other. There's not one umbrella other than NACHA that connects not only as an association and through the regional payments associations, but also we're required to connect if we want to have business with our members to every single one of those other institutions, whatever type they are, and through the ACH network. Yeah,
absolutely. I want to move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and life hacks. I always start with the question, what inspired you to take the gig as president and CEO of Peninsula Credit Union?
Yeah, so some might say a lot of people knocking on my hard head to get it through to me that it would be a great opportunity. It had always been a goal to become a CEO, but this opportunity here at Peninsula really seemed to align with a theme when I was a senior at Pacific Lutheran University. It was the centennial year of the college, and that theme was education for service. And it has never been more true than my last 7 years here at Peninsula that the continual need to educate myself and our organization about what it is that we're doing in order to better serve people. So I felt that opportunity to lead this cooperative in our community and was motivated by, after 1 year being here, so 6 years ago now, becoming a CUDE for the first time, and then African development educator a year later. Different story, but that's what my inspiration was, and it's really proven out to be a positive experience. And
so is something I've talked with Jill about quite often, is like being a CEO sometimes can be a little bit of a lonely job, right? Like but has the inspiration at all changed from being, like you came up in the credit unions, you obviously came over there, and now for the last 6 years, you've been the CEO. Has there been a change in the inspiration, or is it still the same driving force?
I think under it all, it's still the same driving force. Yeah. I'm still trying to learn how to better serve our members first and foremost. I'm always still trying to understand how to better serve and support my team. And together we make that difference. So, if anything, the depth of that motivation is getting thicker the longer that I sit in the seat after 7 years now of being here. It's a really awesome community, a terrific organization and group of people to get to work with.
So a couple of questions here on that. What's your, how would you describe your leadership style?
I would say as an innovator who explores new ideas in order to make a difference in people's lives. So having been a graduate or an alumni, I guess, of the Filey and I3 program, one of the things I took away was understand why things are being done the way they're being done. Don't change things just for change's sake, but always be willing to try something new and be okay with the fact that if it doesn't work out, there's going to be some other new thing that you'll be able to try. And so that program is one of which I went through, now 15, 16 years ago, something like that. It was in the second class, I believe, is really inspired or helped me develop that leadership style.
How would your team at Peninsula describe it?
Nonstop. I don't think there's rarely a time where I'm not thinking or doing something to better this organization or community. And that comes out in emails at all times of the day or night or wherever I'm at. And so they would probably say that is a nonstop guy.
Well, now I have to ask this question. So is there something they've heard you say so many times that they can finish your sentence? They're like, we know, Jim.
Perhaps one of them might be, I guess, assumptions are deadly.
Okay.
So when you're trying to do new things, oftentimes we get connected.
That applies to everything, relationships, work, everything. So,
and why are we doing that? Is probably why or what motivates us is probably another thing that they might hear me say.
Like when you're thinking about your team, you mentioned that people have been with you for quite some time. What's the greatest strength of the Peninsula team?
It's a really high level of service to not let people down and support folks in achieving their next steps in their financial journey and navigating their household survival budget. We have some incredibly compassionate folks that work here at all levels of our organization. And I think we've been doing this community development thing really in earnest for 6 years. It's not a fad here. It is who we are. It's sticking around. There's always opportunities for us to improve what we do, and that dedication to service and the vision our folks have of supporting people in their financial journey is really high. It's really cool.
I was looking forward to asking you this question. You mentioned you've been through the I3 program. You've now, you had a career goal. You mentioned earlier to become a CEO. Is there a mistake that either you made earlier on in your career, like as a young leader, or one that you see other young leaders make? Those knocks we all have to take, I guess you could say. Is there something you can think about there?
I think trying to go too far too fast. And so, and that was pointed out to me at one point when I was probably around 30. It's like, you're accomplishing so much. Why do you want to accomplish so much so soon in your life? You have a lot of opportunity left. And I think that, what I see some people get really personally challenged or disappointed with is that they set short-term goals that might be longer-term time horizons.
Okay. Yeah.
So my goal was to eventually become a CEO, but I never had said I want to do that in 18 months
right.
or 6 months. And I hear that sometimes, like, in the next year, this is what's going to happen. And part of the reason I think that can be challenging is there are a lot of opportunities and more, as we know, that are going to be coming up over the next few years. So that makes it easier. You don't want to just marry an organization as a CEO and learn that spouse is the worst possible fit for you. And I see that happen sometimes where people they reach their goal.
Yeah.
And it's not just CEO. It could be a manager. It could be a senior executive. You have to be ready for what you ask for. And you have to make sure that it's a good fit. The higher you go in organizations professionally, I think the more it is about interviewing each other.
I was just going to say that was in my head it sounds like you're talking about interviewing the interviewee, right? Like to make sure that
That's
it is a great relationship.
Right.
Oh, I love
in
that.
our personal relationships, we have this thing called dating.
Right.
In professional relationships, we might go through a couple, 3, possibly 4 interviews. If we made relationships decisions like that, we would have an even higher divorce rate than we already do in the country, and not so much love.
I agree with you. I mean, it's a challenging thing to do, right? To know if the title and the job may be right, but is the culture and the fit right for you when you come in there? So I think that's amazing advice. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you've just carried along with you throughout your career life?
I would say always understand who you're serving.
It's interesting. You mentioned empathy, which is one of my favorite words earlier in the show. And then to come back to that, to me, it's a beautiful thing.
It's nothing that my grandfather ever said to me explicitly, but one of the things I picked up over time, and he was a banker, was from the stories that he told about the customers that he worked with working at the bank. And it was always about understanding who they were, whether they were apple farmers in Eastern Washington or a couple of brothers starting a new shoe company, which we now know as Nordstrom.
Okay.
It was always understanding what their current need was and what they were trying to accomplish, and serving them as best as he was able. And that's sort of a life lesson that I take with me and keep with me.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff there. As a leader, and this is this is kind of one of these scratch my own itch questions that I've asked over the course of the year of the series of this podcast. But as a leader, how do you make sure that you're keeping your message fresh to your team, but then also that you're keeping Peninsula's credit union's message fresh to the members and to the community?
Yeah, you've hit on something. It's a challenge that I'm thinking about a lot today. Because, as I mentioned before, this is our core purpose, what we're doing in terms of community development work, and it's not changing. And so one of the opportunities that we have is that we capture wow stories or impact stories, and sharing those stories, which sometimes can be seen a lot of similarities, but we're impacting people every day, every week, and externalizing those stories and internalizing those stories, sharing them more broadly with our staff to inspire, and with our community to keep them aware of how we're making a positive difference. And that was something that was, honestly, it was really triggered with me with our most recent DE graduate, Dakota McKinnon, who's our Paulsbo branch manager, who went through the program last spring. And he's like, I think we could enhance what we're already doing and sharing outside of our organization the impact we have in people's lives. So he's now collaborating with our marketing director, Kirk Smith, who's also a DE, in how we can develop strategies around that messaging for our communities next year.
One of my, if you want to call it a pet peeve of mine, and I ran around the state leagues speaking a few years back talking about this, is I think we're too modest as credit unions, right? We don't tell the amazing we're doing. So I think, I love to hear that you guys are sharing that. And to me, that's so much more powerful than we have this rate on a loan. It's really cool to think about it from a development and then working with the marketers to say, go tell the story, right? So,
and it's a worldwide challenge or opportunity. Absolutely. The same is true in Africa, where we're at. So those SACCOs and credit unions, struggle with telling their story. They're very humble folks about what they're doing. And I guess, you just mentioned, the marketers. I'll push on that a little bit and saying it's all of our responsibilities in the organization to share what we're doing, right? Every day, and whoever we come in contact with.
Is to share those stories. I agree with you completely. If you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, what passions do you have outside of credit unions? What does work-life balance or integration look like to Jim?
If it's a short period of time, just getting some time to spend at home, it's great. I live in a beautiful little retreat area. Hop in a kayak and take a float on the creek, or go out on a small little boat that I've got on the lake around the area. If we have a longer period of time, I like to travel. My partner and I like to travel. Last summer, we were in Eastern Europe. So now we're looking forward to next year and where we might go. So those journeys are a really good opportunity to spend time together, my partner and I, and experience other parts of the world.
I thought it was so interesting on the, again, back to the DE trip in Kenya and it made sense after the fact, but I was blown away with like everybody there, but it's probably why we were all in Kenya too, had that like wanderlust gene. It was in a lot of circles. I travel a lot there. I'm like, I've never been to Antarctica, Moscow, St. Petersburg or whatever, it was amazing, right? Like everybody had a story to tell and it was, I absolutely loved it. So I want to be respectful of your time and move on to the third part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be. So do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble that you can share with us, I guess?
You're right. I took a shortcut home with my friend Patrick when I was in first grade.
Okay.
And, it's trying to make things more efficient, even at an early age. Unfortunately, we forgot to communicate that shortcut to my parents. And so when my mom came down the alley that we were walking up from school with the headlights and hopped out of the car, I knew that was not a good move to have not informed or communicated what we were doing.
It's funny. I think is there something with credit union CEOs and kind of ditching out of school or doing something? I think Brett Martinez was like that in like kindergarten or first grade as well. So back at an early
age.
Yeah. Do you have any daily routines that if you don't do, your day just feels off? From our time in Kenya, I journal every morning. So is there, something? I go sit by myself.
I think my days off if I don't hit the snooze button on my alarm at least twice before I actually get out of bed.
I love
that's
that.
That's one routine. Another routine is we've got two smaller dogs and they look forward to their Cheerios every morning. But in all seriousness and grounding, say a prayer before bed each night, and in the morning think about what I'm looking forward to and what I'm grateful for, because there's a lot that I'm really blessed to have the opportunity to do what I do and to know who I know, not only locally under the same roof as I live in, but around the world. The friendships make me a much stronger and more fulfilled person.
When you mentioned, just to follow up to that, in the morning, when you take a look out, do you then, do you write that down? Do you have a to-do list? Do you like anything like that? Or is it just more of a being grateful, looking forward?
Yeah, I don't do any of the journaling, not that bug that you have yet. Although I was inspired by it to be true. I've bought journals before. They don't have a lot in them.
For years I threw away journals that I would buy because I always thought it was an amazing idea. So, but it took me a lot of throwing away ones that were empty before I finally was like, all right, I'll start this. The random question for you: what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to from front to back.
So I'm not a big album listener tour, but I do enjoy music of a lot of different genres and varieties. Probably my biggest musical connection is with musicals.
Okay.
So I really enjoy theater and musicals, and a couple of the more recent musicals in relative terms are Come From Away and Dear Evan Hansen.
Yep.
The concept in Come From Away that we all come from somewhere else. We all bring other things to where we're at right now and the plight that we are in. And then Dear Evan Hansen was addressing some challenges that many people have in life, but in that musical, particularly youth and mental health issues. So I learned from those, and I will wind up playing those on repeat sometimes in the car. And when you're listening to singing along to Come From Away and you're on an airplane, it gives the person next to you a little bit of pause.
Yeah, right.
If you don't know anything about the musical, the planes that landed in Gander, Newfoundland after 9/11 is that scene. So
Jill and I went and saw that on Broadway a couple of years, almost 2 years ago now. So it was about a year and a half ago. But anyways, that was amazing. I mean, it was fantastic. I'm a big reader. We have a stack of books in our house, and a lot of them have been recommended to us that we're still trying to make our way through. But is there a book that you've either gifted or you just recommend that everybody should read?
So one that I usually keep a couple of copies around is Life is What You Make It.
Okay.
Peter is talking about, how do you create your own path to fulfillment? And I think as leaders, and you mentioned this earlier, and I've drawn some parallels actually to my first safari in Africa and the lions that we saw, the pride of all safaris and the big, strong animal that lions are perceived to be, and just what path do they create? What path do we create as leaders? And we sometimes forget to ask people that we're following if they're okay. we assume, because they're in that position and looked at as the strong person, the one that has all the answers, and sometimes asking them how things are really truly going is a really powerful question. So, but life is what you make it. And as a leader, you don't necessarily get those questions asked of you a lot. And so you have to create that own positive identity and that positive future and persevere through a lot of challenges, find the opportunities and pursue those.
Fantastic. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, has anything become less important?
What's become more important is quality time with family and friends. Actually, there was a period in my late 20s, early 30s where I had a very close-knit group of friends all living around the Portland area. And it was not uncommon to, 1 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon say, hey, we're going to barbecue this afternoon and get together and just start the week off right. Sometimes we would end the week with that same group of friends on Friday too. But that quality time has become even more important with my partner and close friends very much.
Has anything become less important?
I think everything's important, I guess. So, sometimes I guess the less important is prioritizing all of the different things that might be going on in life and determining what is less important at that particular time.
At that point in time.
Travel for work related sometimes is less important. Getting on one more airplane and seeing one more hotel room, or, you get to go to these exotic places and participate in board meetings. True. And it would be really nice sometimes if those rooms had windows.
Right. Yeah. There's still the amount of times that I've looked at the air conditioner is, oh
my gosh.
You're like, I hear there's an ocean on the other side, but that's not the room they booked me in. So yeah. Jim, there's a question I don't send. I like still surprising people with it. But when you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Elmer Anderson, who was my grandfather.
Okay. I love it.
He was an incredibly successful and influential person for me. And I think he's passed away. So today I would say Chad Helmanak at the National Credit Union Foundation. I think he's doing amazing things with the DE program and really setting it forward on a path that takes a lot of the cooperative operating principles and the credit union theory, if you will, the heart, and is creating connections for people to apply that in their decision-making and their focus on how credit unions operate and what they're striving to accomplish.
That is awesome. Well, Jim, thank you again for being on the show. The last question I have of you is, do you have any final asks or thoughts you'd like to say to the listeners?
It's kind of a summary of what we've talked about, Randy. I would say that trust and think about what it is that you're doing every day that is making an unknown impact on people's lives. Tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now, you may not realize what you did today and how that's changed the course of somebody's life. So there's so many examples of that come to mind, but trust that you're making an unknown impact, I'd say.
That is a beautiful way to wrap this up. We will link to everything we talked about in the show notes and all the folks we talked about as well. Is there a best way or a preferred way for people to reach you if they have additional questions of you? Twitter, LinkedIn, email? What's your preferred weapon?
Probably the preferred way is email.
Okay.
I am on LinkedIn as well and happy to connect that way. I just ask that if people do that they drop me a note and letting me know that they heard us chat today on this podcast so that I can make that connection.
Absolutely. Well, we'll link to your LinkedIn. Also, your email will be out there and everything else we talked about. So thank you again, Jim. I hope you have an amazing day and I hope we see each other in person soon as well, my friend.
Great. Thanks, Randy.